Goal selection will refer to this concept of that moment in time where the prefrontal cortex is faced with the need to decide, what am I going to do? Now that can be for something as simple as the baby wanting to reach out and grasp a toy, or reach out towards a sound or a face. It can be as complex as the 22-year-old trying to decide, should I take this job or should I take that job? Or what if there is no job offer? Do I move back home with mom and dad? It's the 8-year-old who's faced with a social situation on the playground, and this child has Asperger's, and social interaction is difficult for this child anyway, and the decision opportunity comes into play. Do I use these social verbal communication skills, or do I follow impulsive, less well thought out plans? How do I decide what is the behavior that I think is appropriate to this set of conditions? So what am I going to do? Do I call up something I've used before? Do I use a standard routine from before? Or do I have to, in this case, determine some completely new, novel course of action? Goal selection is also dependent on the ability to predict and anticipate. So predicting outcomes, anticipating consequences, those are very abstract skills, and in the younger child who doesn't have well-developed goal selection yet, and who doesn't have very abstract language yet at all, and isn't expected to, a lot of goal selection, a lot of this piece of executive functions is determined by external sources, the adults in that child's environment, or the rules. With maturity, then you kind of move from the continuum of externally controlled decisions about what you will behaviorally do to the young adult who is assuming their own internal control for goal selection and determining, what am I going to do? And somewhere in between, you've got the teenager who has ever more increasing opportunity to go off into unforeseen circumstances, novel situations, and you just hope that you've done your best to lay out a good array of prior knowledge, past experience, so that when they get into a position of having to decide, what am I going to do, and they pull all of this information into working memory, then you hope that that 16-year-old is going to make a mature decision about what to do, as opposed to one that's less advantageous. Okay. So goal selection. And next is planning and organization. So again, as I go through each of these, think of these as very discrete, specific, separate skills, different components of executive functions. There are multiple executive functions, and I've boiled them down into these main 6 to best represent what the literature talks about and what terms you'll see used in formal tests that you might come across or decide to use. So first there was goal selection. Now we have planning and organization. So if I've determined what to do, the next phase of those executive function skills is to decide, how am I going to do X? It encompasses the ability to recognize a need to act. I have to determine what things are necessary to complete this task. That includes, what are the relevant materials? What is the relevant information that I have got to do, that I've got to find? It includes taking into account, what do I have available, or am I going to have to make do with what I have? Planning and organization also has to do with strategy development. to meet an outcome, sequencing of those plans, that information, and those materials. It also is the part where we have to account for the time constraints or the expectations or the requirements. So you can't really just plan in your own little bubble. You know, we have to be able to plan how to carry out this decision, how to carry out this goal that I have opted to execute. How will I plan it and organize it and get a strategy and develop steps and sequence those steps in some fashion as to account for how much time I have, what are the expectations that people have of me, and what are the requirements. So how many of our kids do we work on sequencing, planning, organization with? Think about the language skills of some of the kids in your caseload and how well those language skills do or do not support effective planning and effective organization. How many of those kids in your caseload who have poor planning and poor organization, do they use language well to group information, to sort content? Can they sequence steps in a task? Can they determine which things are relevant or not relevant to carrying out a task? We do a lot of verbal planning. We do a lot of work to help verbal organization. And the reason is because those verbal organization skills, assigning meaning, assigning degrees of difference, being able to use language words to sequence thoughts and steps and plans, those are all critical to that tertiary processing where now I've decided what I'm going to do. I've been able to attend long enough to pay attention and get the big picture. I can attend to what's relevant. I can inhibit my impulsive response long enough to stop and think and allow the executive functions to kick in. I have the working memory capacity that's sufficient to allow me to juggle all of these variables at once and make a determination, make a prediction, compare to previous experience and decide, I'm going to do this. Now I've got to plan and organize. I still have to inhibit my impulses. I still have to maybe withhold my initial response long enough to let language come into the picture and mediate your thoughts. Whether it's a manipulative task or a visual spatial task, some degree of deliberate thinking and reasoning and planning and organization has to come into play. And if we don't have the linguistic backing to help us do that, the planning and organization element of executive functions will be impaired. When you work with the brain injury population, you might see every aspect of these 6 executive function components impaired. On the other hand, depending again on which part of the frontal lobe, if it's a very specific site of lesion, if it's a very focal lesion, you might see somebody who could determine relatively good plans and make fairly good decisions and absolutely lack in planning and organization. And so all of this good comparison and decision making, prediction of outcomes and impulse control, it's all wonderful, but if I can't plan and organize, how effective will the outcome be? Third component of executive functions is initiation and persistence. So can I get going? And this is really more to do with the ability, the actual ability to self-start. It's more than just realizing now I have to start doing something. It's more than just knowing what the goal is. It's more than knowing what the goal is and having generated a viable plan. Now I have to do something with it. I have to start. And In some kids, if you look at sort of a continuum of extremes, you've got those kids I'm sure you can all think of who don't have any problem getting started or persisting because they can't stop. Getting started is not the problem. Probably for this group of kids, impulse control and inhibition is the problem. That's the piece that's really missing. On the other end of the continuum, you have the other extreme opposite for the kid who cannot get started, can't initiate, can't. This group of kids tends to be a lot more flat affect. They have minimal output. They have limited verbal output. They tend to initiate very little. They tend to have minimal appearance of concern. Time constraints don't really seem to have an effect. It's this inability to initiate. And again, in the head-injured population, when you see somebody who has this specific piece of executive functions knocked out, it can really be astonishing. You'll see a person who stands, sits, does nothing. And you might, linguistically, they may completely comprehend the task. I once had a woman with a frontal lobe injury, and language-wise, she completely understood the request, "I'd like you to write your name on this paper." She could motorically repeat that sentence to me. She could restate the request in her own words. She could acknowledge, we'd already ruled out language receptive and expressive as a problem. So she comprehended, you want me to write my name on this piece of paper. She did not have upper extremity, fine motor weakness, control problems. She did not have those motor deficits. And she could write. Now, when you pulled all this together into a functional situation, such a simple request as, "Would you please go ahead and write your name on this piece of paper?" we sat for 15 minutes. And so periodically I would say, "What are you getting ready to do?" "I'm going to write my name on this paper." "Okay. Do you have everything you need?" "Yes, I've got the paper and this pen." "Okay. Whenever you're ready." And we sit and we sit. Minutes pass, and you can again re-cue and re-prompt. "What are you thinking about doing right now?" "I need to write my name on the paper."